Howdy, I'm Chris Wahl. We're going to talk about using PowerCLI. In fact, this is an introduction to PowerCLI for those that want to PowerShell all the things. Quick note on what PowerCLI is. It's a set of commandlets and functions provided by VMware, so it's all their code. Don't blame me if it blows anything up in your data center. As version 6, it's a module, and prior to that, it was a Snapin. Actually, under the covers, it's a module and a Snapin, but we'll go through that. So if you've never used PowerShell before, and you've installed PowerCLI somewhere, I assume you have it installed, otherwise you can't use it. You'll notice a little doohickey on your desktop or in your start menu saying run PowerCLI in either 32-bit mode or not. We're going to skip all that. I'm going to show you how to load it in an actual integrated scripting environment that I have up here. And you can look at that by doing a get-module with a parameter of list available. So if I run that, it'll come back and give me all the modules that are available on the computer. You'll notice at the bottom there's all these vmware.vimautomation.something. Right, so those are all the VMware modules. They all begin with that vmware.vimautomation. In fact, .core is one that we really want. Just to show you what else is on here, I can scroll up and you can see other manifests and scripts that are provided by Microsoft and are default for kind of a Windows box, as well as some other areas. But that's where it's listed. If you have the older version of PowerCLI, 5.8 and older, really, you can do a git ps snapin. Snapins kind of suck. I'm glad that they went to modules because they don't auto-load, and just frankly, they're not that great. But you can see I've also got some Snapins listed here. The vmware.vimautomation.core is the key one. So if you want to actually load those for your scripts, if you're writing some code in the integrated scripting environment, if you're running the module, you want to run this particular commandlet. So we want import-module, and then you can go ahead and supply the name. It's vmware.vimautomation.core. So I can run it here. And it should just come back with nothing. In a lot of cases, for PowerShell, a return of null, essentially, is good. And if you get the red text on your screen, it means something went bad. It's because it's not a very chatty shell. In fact, you have to pipe a parameter of verbose if you want to get like actual feedback. So now that I've loaded the module, I can do a get module without any other parameters and see that it's now loaded. You can see the script and the manifest for the vmware.vimautomation.core and the SDK are now loaded. Right? So we can now do things with the commandlets. In fact, if I want to see all the commandlets for there, I can do a get command, pipe in a module, or rather add a parameter called module, and just do vmware.vimautomation.core. And it'll tell you every single commandlet that exists. It's obviously mountains of output on my screen. So if you're not doing the module, if you're doing the snapin, similar type commandlet, except we want add-ps snapin. So modules are imported, snapins are added. If you're running version 6 of PowerCLI, you don't have to do anything with the ps snapin. All you have to do is the module. Right? So I'm going to skip that. We won't have to run it, but you would be able to do get snapin. So the next thing you have to do, if you want to do pretty much anything with PowerCLI, is actually connect to a virtual center server. And the commandlet's kind of a throwback to the old days when it was called virtual infrastructure. So it's connect-vi server. So what I've got here is a commandlet where we can connect to my vCenter server. I'm just connecting back to my lab system. So what I'm going to do is connect into my vCenter server, and instead of supplying a username and password in plain text, which is a big no-no, I've just piped it, or I've set it to a parameter called credential, where I'm actually just telling it to get my credential. It's kind of a lazy man's way there. So I'll just run that command and saying, hey, before I let you connect, let's get the credential information. So I'll put on my rubric information, and my password is 37 bullet points, apparently. This is something that I wanted to show you. It's actually giving me a certificate invalid error, and that's new to kind of the PowerShell 5.8 and later world, where if it's a self-signed certificate, it's going to kind of bitch at you a little bit. You can do a thing where you can have it ignore self-signed certs or just know that it's going to throw that there. But this just means that I'm connected. The output is the name of the vCenter server and the user that I'm connected as. And in fact, there's a global variable that PowerShell, or rather PowerCLI saves to, called default VI server, which is the connected server that you're on right now, and default VI servers, plural, which is all the servers that you're connected to. So if I just do a global : default VI server, I can look at all the parameters and objects within that particular variable. The global is because that's the scope that it's saved at. Instead of user or script, it's a global variable that exists across every scope for the computer. And I'm actually just piping it to an FL, which is format list, so we can see it a little prettier on the screen. So here's all the information about my connection. You can see that I'm connected. It's true. The vcenter1.rubric.demo is the vCenter I'm connected to, the user that I'm connected as. And what I think is interesting is the session information. So if you're looking to do something a little fancy, maybe this isn't your first time using PowerCLI, you can actually look at the session ID. It gives you this long kind of GUID UUID value. And if you want to reconnect using some other script, you can just pass along that particular string to the other session when you connect with the session ID parameter. Okay? So what can you do with PowerCLI? All that we've talked about so far is connecting. That's kind of boring, right? Let's actually pull some data. Everything in PowerShell is object-oriented, so you're going to get objects back, and each object has a parameter and a method associated with it. So let's just do get VM host, which should go and get all of my ESXi hosts that are in the system. There we go. So it's come back and said I have 6 hosts in this particular vCenter environment. It gives me a little bit of information about it, but largely this isn't very helpful to me. It's just spitting some stuff out into a screen. Most of the time what you want to do is go and retrieve data and store it to a variable. So I'm just saying all of this data is going to go to my hosts. So I'm running this particular commandlet. There's no output because it saved it all to a variable called my hosts. And if I use my variable explorer, and if I expand that, there we go, we can see here is my host variable, and it contains all the data that we saw a little bit earlier. So each host is represented as an object, and all the data for the host is also objects. To show you that, let me go through and ask for all of the name objects for every host that's stored in the variable. So if I run myhost.name, I'm just saying go through the myhost variable, which is an array, and for each object in the array, pull back the name parameter. And it said here are the name of all my hosts. I could also say I just want the first host. Now, first in computer language is 0. That's the first thing in there in the array. So I can say, give me just the first object in the array and return the name. I could also manipulate the data because it's not a string, or it's not just plain text, right? It's objects that can be manipulated. So I can say, go through my host array objects, find the name of each host, and change the value to an uppercase presentation of the string. And there it's given me all the outputs in fully uppercase. So really you can do whatever you want with it. In fact, here's another version of it where I've split all of the string data by the period. So now it's giving me the ESX03, and then the rubric, and then the demo as its own pieces of string. There's also some logic that you can apply to this, and this is where it starts getting interesting for scripting. So let's say I wanted to find any host that matched ESX02, for example. So I can say, let me move my cursor here. For each host that I find in the array, so I just made up the a host in my hosts, then use the curly brace to say what we do, and in this case, for every time that I find a host, I want to ask it if that host's name, that's the ahost.name, matches, regular expression, ESX02. So we're just looking for anything that's a partial string match for that particular object. And if I find it, I'll write a warning that says I found it. So it's pretty simple stuff. Let's run that and see what it's doing. So if I just select that area and execute, it should come back and it found one host named ESX02.rubric.demo. So because everything's object-based and has parameters and methods that go with it, you can do a lot of interesting things. I mean, this doesn't really have any output here that's interesting, but maybe you're looking through all of the stats information or the parameters of a host, and instead of warning that you found a host, you can say, warn me when CPU is greater than 95%, or warn me when there's more than 50 virtual machines. Or you can roll through and iterate through every virtual machine in your environment and give you a warning when there's snapshots that exist or a certain size. The world's pretty much your oyster, and having a product like the PowerShell ISE, which is a great integrated scripting environment where you can kind of navigate through the objects and see what's in them and expand them out and play with them, is a good way to learn. So that's a quick and dirty introduction to PowerCLI, enough to get you connected, look through some objects, and write your first logical statement.